Okay, Erev Tov. Great to see you. Thank you so much for joining. Good evening to all of you. If you are able to turn on your video, that'd be wonderful, so you can give us all chizuk to see your bright smile. But if you're not able to, that's also okay, and we appreciate you joining us. Today, just a line or two. Today was a dark day for American democracy, and it's on our minds. What happened today when a violent crowd stormed the Capitol was something which is just a direct attack on our democracy. And so we hope and pray that stability and civility will be restored soon, and just better times for our country up ahead. But that's not the topic for tonight. Tonight we're excited to be focusing on our timeless and timely Torah and Masorah, and specifically a vision of Jewish law in the postmodern age. I want to express my appreciation to Heidi and Albert Proa for sponsoring the Modern Minds Conversation series, and for all you do for the community. Thank you so much, Albert and Heidi. Great to see you on. We have the privilege of hosting back in our community, and not back in person. And of course, we look forward to all being together in person. But until that point, we're doing what we can to figure it out, to stay connected and staying uplifted. And so great to welcome back. We've had Rav Ronen a number of times in our community, and great to welcome you back, Rav Ronen. Thank you so much for waking up early in Medinat Yisrael, live from Israel. Rav Ronen served as rabbi of the Oel Hari congregation in Ranana and other Modern Orthodox communities in Israel for 15 years. He served as the rabbi of Bnei Akiva of North America, who's founder and first executive director of Beit Hillel, and director of the rabbinic training program of the Tzohar Rabbinical Organization. He also worked in Israel's high-tech industry and served as a captain in the Navy Special Forces. So he has quite a resume, and to put it succinctly, Rav Ronen is one of the leading forward-thinking religious Zionist rabbis that we have today, and so it's so great to have the opportunity to host Rav Ronen for a conversation that's going to center around his very, very interesting new book, which I ordered a couple of months ago. I've read through most of it. And the book is called The Narrow Halachic Bridge, a vision of Jewish law in the postmodern age. And so, Rav Ronen, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my absolute pleasure, and thank you so much, Rabbi Topp, for the introduction. And as you said before, I really hope and look forward to seeing you all soon in person, Bezat Hashem.
Okay, wonderful. Now, before I forget, because I really think it's a really interesting book, and so there's a link in the chat that we just posted for a discounted price to purchase the book. So let's have a conversation, Rav Ronen, about Jewish law and Masorah, the way it's interpreted and transmitted over the course of the generations, because that's very, very important to us as a community. We're modern-minded, we're forward-thinking, we live in the modern world, but we're very much rooted in tradition, and we're very interested in how the Torah and how Masorah impacts and is applied to our lives and also to the Jewish people. So we're really, really interested in the discussion tonight. So and let's, based a little bit on our conversation leading up to the event, I'm going to ask you some questions, and we'll have a conversation. If anyone has some questions or comments, they're welcome to put it through the chat box, or also can, I guess you could raise your hand. We'll see if we can get it that way, but please put it through the chat box. In the introduction to your book, Rav Ronen, you say that halacha, which is supposed to serve as a bridge between eternal Torah and changing reality, faces unprecedented challenges due to the difficulty in bridging the growing gaps between the eternal Torah and changing reality. What do you mean by saying that halacha is meant to serve as a bridge? Why do you define it as a narrow bridge? I remember we used to always sing the song, Kol Olam Kulo Gesher Tzar Ma'od, right? It's a narrow bridge, and one doesn't have to fear because we believe in Hashem. But what do you mean by that it's a narrow bridge, and that halacha is supposed to serve as that bridge? And what makes the challenges unprecedented in our day?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think this is actually the major narrative of the book. And throughout the book, I'm trying to analyze the different challenges based on these questions. So let's start at the beginning to define why is halacha the bridge. On Mount Sinai, Hashem has given us the Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah. The Torah Shebichtav is divine. We don't have the permission to touch even one single word of the Torah Shebichtav. It's eternal. It will remain eternal because it's divine. It's not us. At the very same time, together with the Torah Shebichtav, and this is in fact the next parsha, Parshat Mishpatim, Hashem has given us the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah. The oral Torah is ours. If you remember the famous story about Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim, the oven of Machnai, they had a dispute because, major dispute because Rabbi Eliezer brought all the proofs from heaven that he's right, he's correct, his halacha is correct about the oven. Chachamim, led by Rabbi Yeshua, said, and that's what Rabbi Yeshua said, Lo b'shamayim. With all the respect, Rabbi Eliezer, to your miracles and to the support of God, the Torah Sheba'al Peh is not in heaven. It was given to us, to men, and I'll explain why in a second. By the way, it's very interesting because in that midrash, in the end, Rabbi Natan is asking Eliyahu Hanavi, what did Hashem say at that point? And Hashem said, Nitzchuni banai. My children have triumphed over me because this is their Torah. The Torah Sheba'al Peh is ours. And what's the role of the Torah Sheba'al Peh? To, especially the halacha, to create the bridge between the heavenly Torah, which is untouchable, to the old Torah, which is ours. Since reality is changing, the Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah, will never change. We need a tool to bridge between the changing reality and the Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah. That's the role of the halacha, to serve as a bridge. Over the course of generations, and this is something which is described at length in my book, halacha has evolved. Whoever says that halacha was frozen is completely mistaken. Halacha was always dynamic. However, it had a very, very slow pace. By the way, that's why it's called halacha. The root of halacha is lalechet, to walk. Halacha was never jumping, never running, never skipping. Was walking in a very slow pace. It was never ignoring the weaknesses and the shortcomings of reality. At the very same time, it never surrendered to them. It was trying to set a vision, yet understand the reality or the new realities or the new technologies or the new norms or whatever. That was the role of halacha over the course of generations, to serve as a bridge. And that's why it's a very narrow bridge, because it's a very nuanced dance. Walking a little bit forward, a little bit backwards, like a tango. That was the halacha. In that sense, the halacha is giving the Torah its eternity, because this is the only way that the Torah can apply to each and every generation because of the halacha. That's the strength of the halacha, and more than we kept the halacha kept Am Israel, it kept us in the Galut. Halacha is maybe the most important thing that we have, and we see it in other communities that abandoned the holiness of halacha. Things started to dissipate without commitment. There's no continuity. Halacha is the continuity of Am Israel. That's the strength. So halacha is a bridge between the Torah Shebichtav and the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Halacha is a narrow bridge because it walks very slowly and in a very, very careful pace.
Say that if I could chime in just a couple of things, Rav Ronen, about Nitzchuni Banai, that Nitzchuni means that we were victorious over Hashem, and that our interpretation of the Torah carries the day because it was given to us. I also once heard that Nitzchuni means to make it something for eternity. that because Hashem gives it to us and we have, it's in our domain, that's what eternalizes the Torah and will make it always relevant. I just wanted to chime in and also in terms of halacha. Is it that I always thought that it was that halacha stays the same, but that halacha is resilient and flexible enough to deal with changing reality. What I think I might have heard from you is that halacha changes. Is it that halacha changes, or is it that the halachic application changes because of the different realities?
It depends. There are many examples. Sometimes it's exactly what you said, that the halacha is not changing, only the applications of the halacha, or the bottom line, like every shoot, every response has a flow. So sometimes you can take the same halacha and the bottom line will be very different because of the changing realities and the circumstances and so on and so forth. But there has been times, definitely if we go, back in time to the time of Chazal when we had Sanhedrin, sometimes there were certain halachot that were changed in certain ways, also over the course of the years, certain enactments. Again, there are many examples, but I think, again, going back to our times, we spoke about unprecedented challenges. I think what is unprecedented is the pace. In the past, the pace of change of society, of norms of thinking, of technology was very slow, and halacha was able to catch up. What happens in our times that the world is changing in such a rapid pace, let alone technology and internet that has completely, can you think about life without internet, without email, without Facebook? I think we've all been there 30 years ago. It has completely changed our lives. But even more so, like every 5 years, if in the past, changes occurred in a span of 50 years, 100 years, every 5 years you have a new generation thinking differently, viewing the world differently. Everything that has changed in such a rapid pace has completely changed the way we perceive the world. Especially, and I'm thinking especially about the younger generation. Take TikTok as an example. We all have heard about TikTok. Does any of you ever try TikTok? Do you know we know about it, but we don't live according to this. Younger generation, like for some of them, this is one of their values. Now we can judge, we can be, it doesn't matter. The world is changing in such a rapid pace. And halacha, and it affects everything, the way we think, the way we see the world. If in the past we've seen the world in a more dogmatic way, today everything is open, like endless choices. That's part of the postmodern world. There's no absolute truth. I have ownership on my truth, and I don't care about your truth. That's part of the postmodern world. Like all the structure of halacha, of Judaism, of giving halacha from, top down to the congregants. Everything, all these structures are, in that sense, dissipating. The world is changing in such a rapid pace. Halacha, or certainly the poskim, are very confused and trying to pull backwards to defend halacha. And the gap between halacha, or the way it's presented today, to the norms of society, to the way, and I'm thinking especially about the millennials, about the younger generation, is growing bigger every single day. Not only the halacha is unable to catch up, the gap is huge, almost unbridgeable. And therefore, and that's a major note in my book, we can't change halacha. We'll never change halacha. Changing halacha did not work, does not work. We've seen this, again, without commitment, there's no continuity. We need to have a paradigm shift about the way we perceive halacha based on all the richness of the sources we had in the past. And I wish to, just to finish with one line, many times we associate rabbinical leadership with rabbinical supervision. I think what we need to have in our times is not a rabbinical supervision, rather rabbinical supervision, a vision for the future, a supervision for the future. Instead of being reactive, we need to take a deep breath and think about the world in 20, 30 years. And basically that's where my book is leading. Let's try to imagine the world in 30 years. Where will be our children, our grandchildren? We need to pave the path. If you want them to stay in the system that we believe in, the system of halakha, of Judaism, we need to rethink. We need to have a paradigm shift courageously. If halakha, or in general, rabbinical leadership was based on authority, we need to have a paradigm shift of switching authority to empowerment. Instead of using power, using empowerment and finding ways without changing halacha to make sure that the next generation and generation after, with all the rapid changes, will be part of the system.
So it's so thank you, Rav Ronen. In terms of the changes, you know, Orthodoxy has a reputation of not being open to change. I don't think it's true, and I think your argument is that the Orthodoxy and the Masorah can change to adapt to the modern world in which we live. But just I'll quote our member leader Steve Weinstock, who once joked. He said, "How many Orthodox rabbis does it take to change a light bulb?" Change. But joking aside, and I know everyone's laughing, but it's on mute, so I don't hear you. But joking aside, I once heard from Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb, Zechron Lebracha, that the Masorah is a little bit like orthodontics. That the Jewish practice does need to change due to the evolving realities, but it can't change too quickly, because then it's going to break, and if it doesn't change at all, then it's not going to be in the proper position. So it has to change like orthodontics. You know, it has to change slowly, and that's the most effective way. Touching on your last point, Rav Ronen, about I think you alluded to in terms of rabbinic decision making, because that's something that comes across in your book, which is that rabbinic leadership that has become accustomed to being more responsive and defensive in their rulings. And now that we're blessed to have a state of Israel, and also with all the changing realities, you argue for a more confident and more proactive approach to halachic decision making. Can you give us an example or two of a responsive, defensive ruling, and explain why you think it needs to be reconsidered in the modern age?
Okay, we have, as we know, many defensive, especially in our times, as we said before, trying to protect our community. Whether it's effective or not, it's a different question. I wish actually to take an example, a very interesting example of Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, from the author of the Shutz Read the Ish, one of the greatest poskim that we have in the previous generation, as an example to a proactive psak, which in a sense was ahead of his time. And I'm speaking about women. You know, we know that one of the major issues we have in our communities is women in halacha, participation of women in all different ways. And I'm not getting now into specifics. I just want to give an example of a psika that is a communal psika that takes in account what is happening in society. So anyways, the question was asked is about co-ed youth movement in Yeshurun, the co-ed youth movement Yeshurun in France, whether this is permissible. By the way, the first time I was in LA was under the capacity of leadership of a co-ed youth movement of Bnei Akiva. So that's definitely one of the questions, you know, we always talk about in Bnei Akiva. Anyways, I want to quote what he wrote in his tshuva. In countries like Germany and France, women feel it is an insult and violation of their rights if we forbid them from participating in singing holy songs at an Oneg Shabbat. One of the questions was about singing together, because when you have a Kohen movement, you sing together. And what about Shirat Nashim, about women singing, which is an halachic issue? This is understood by whoever knows the nature of women in these countries. Prohibition of this activity could lead women to be distanced from religion, God forbid. Let's understand what he says. First of all, he begins with overviewing the different approaches about women singing, and he brings up the approach of his teachers, Rav Shimshon Hirsch and Rabbi Zriel Hildesheimer, that they allowed, but his decision is made upon one thing: understanding the community. He realizes that if we prohibit something which can be permitted according to the halacha, according to some opinions, we push women away. So we might be more stringent in keeping the halacha, but this stringency is actually a leniency because we push women away. Does it mean that we will do everything which is non-halachic? God forbid. But there's a halachic possibility, and therefore, it doesn't see this as a leniency that is more makel. It's a stringency. I want women in, because otherwise we will lose them. He understands the reality, doesn't sit in the ivory tower, just with his Gemara, completely connected with disconnected from the reality, from the culture. He is there, I'm dwelling within my people, understanding the people, understanding the community. And therefore he says, I wish to finish, and I understand some of the fervent ones who criticize Yeshurun, but they ignore the situation in France. And he speaks about the Haredi communities that moved from Eastern Europe to France. Those among the old guard of the ultra-Orthodox Jews have no influence of the way of life of the larger community. What he says, I understand the people that object, but they live in their own ivory tower. And at the end of the day, what we do with our children. And Rabbi Topp, one of the things I'm focusing in my book is empowering community rabbis to be able to give Piskei Halacha, to train them, to have even a school, because many times community rabbis can give Psak Halacha, which is much more correct. There's no right or wrong. The question is, who's your audience? Community rabbis that are also by themselves torn with the same challenges, with the same conflicts. They live amongst their communities. They can give Piskei Halacha that are much more relevant and accurate for the congregants. I'll end up with a story. There's a story about Rabbi Lichtenstein, Zichrono Livracha. That's one of his Talmidim, who was serving as a Rav Kehillah, came up to him to ask a halachic question. What was the response of Rabbi Lichtenstein? He said to him, listen, I might be more knowledgeable in Torah than you are, but you are much more knowledgeable about your community than I am, and therefore you should give them the psak, not me.
I once heard that I think it was Rav Moshe Feinstein who was asked, who do we follow, the Aruch HaShulchan, Rav Yechiel Michal Epstein, or the Mishnah Berurah, the Chavetz Chaim, if they disagree. Right, those were two great halachic authorities in the first part of the 20th century, and even though I think maybe the Mishnah Berurah maybe is more widely followed by many, but Rav Moshe Feinstein felt to give preference to the Aruch HaShulchan. He said because the Aruch HaShulchan was the Rav of a community, so he understood the life that people were living and the challenges that people were going through, as opposed to the Mishabura, of course, a tremendous Gaon, Gadol Hador, but the Mishabura was the Rosh Yeshiva. And so Rav Moshe Feinstein gave preference to the Aruch HaShulchan over the Mishabura because he was connected to a community. Relating to the Sridei Eish, that tshuva, so he allows men and women to sing together, but it was really more for Kiruv, dealing with the young of his community who were maybe distant from Torah, and he felt that it was a bold psak to enable them to sing together to get closer to Torah. I looked into this recently in terms of what about for our strong modern Orthodox families, like all those that are on the call now, would that psak of the Sridei Eish to allow men and women to sing together apply? And based on my research, to point out, and I spoke with poskim at YU, and the poskim said that yes, that psak of the Sridei Eish, the Chil Yaakov Weinberg, years ago for Kiruv, would apply even for our strong families today, because that's and I tell people at the Shabbat table, at our Shabbat table, that I encourage men and women to sing Zmira together, because right, if it's men and women sing together, so there's no focus on a single voice, and number two, it's holy songs, so we're less concerned about anything improper coming as a result of it, and because of that combination, we could apply it even to our modern times, to our community. So that's your point, Rav Ronen, which is that someone might say, no, the Sridei Eish was talking about one specific thing, but I felt, and based on my conversations, that no, it should apply to our communities as well. That people need that connection through Shira, through Zmirot at the Shabbat table, to be really connected and empowered.
I totally agree. And if I can just add one anecdote, I think we live in a world of care. Like the world today is so confusing, even within our, what we call the strong cycles, people are confused. So we live in a world of care. That's our reality today.
Right. The tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein on Chalav Yisrael is another example of a bold psak. It's maybe not as cutting edge a topic as women in halacha, but it's about the drinking of milk, where the Mishnah and the Gemara are clear that you could only drink milk that was milked by a Jew or supervised by a Jew. But what do we do in the United States of America? And Rav Moshe Feinstein saw that people were drinking milk from dairies and farms around America, but there was no Jew supervising it. And he said because of the governmental regulations that there are penalties upon any dairy, any farm that sells milk that's not cow's milk, and that if they were to mix in, camel's milk or horse's milk, there would be severe penalties and they might be shut down. Rav Moshe Feinstein said because of that fear that a company has to go against the government regulations, so it's as if we have a presumption, and it's as if we're witnessing it, that it's if a Jew is present supervising it, because we know, we have a knowledge that they're going to follow the law of the land. I think there's just another example that comes to mind of a bold psak of a Rav recognizing, the new reality.
Yeah, and the community.
You mentioned something I found very interesting in the book was that you one line over here, that you place the final responsibility of decision making on the shoulders of the questioner. And it's interesting because you were just talking about Rav Aaron Lichtenstein saying, talking to a Rav and what the halacha is and what the and that the Rav knows his community. But that's interesting. Can you explain a little bit more about that? Where the Rav really should, that the questioner, the congregant, the layperson should be part of the decision making process. What did you mean by that?
Thank you. So first of all, this is what I'm defining in my book as the empowering psak or empowering psika, which is one of my 10 recommendations at the end of the book about forward thinking about the future of halacha. Today, we need to understand reality. People reject authority. We see this almost in every field. It's not that they totally reject, But since people have knowledge, and since people have easy access to knowledge, they take every authority as something which is doubtful. Let's take an example. You go to the doctor, you have a problem. Before you go, you make a research in the internet, and sometimes you know much more than he does. And it is true to any expert, any area. Obviously, it affects the rabbinical world. In the past, it was very simple. There's authority, there's a Rav, there's a Talmud. You ask a question, and once you ask a rabbi a question, you are obliged to follow. You are not allowed to ask another rabbi, whether it's more stringent or it doesn't matter. Once you subject yourself to the authority of the rabbi, you must follow his psak. In our world, and again, I'm speaking, especially thinking about the younger generation, it doesn't work. People want ownership on their decisions. That's the spirit. And telling them what to do might work in certain circles, not in most circles. Empowering psak is a different way of presenting the psak. Instead of telling them, this is what you have to do, you go back, because they're knowledgeable, explain to them the different components and elements in the question they are asking. What are the different options? What is from the Torah, rabbinical, what are the different opinions? And then you can give them your recommendation. And I'm emphasizing the recommendation because if this is a psak, they must follow. And telling them, here's the picture, you are wise enough, I trust you. Make the decision based on the information I gave you. Once we do this, people will have a sense of one trust in the rabbi. Is not trying to dictate or it trusts our decision, our consideration. And number two, they will feel ownership on the psak. Once a rabbi gives you a psak, especially today, you tend to rebel, to ignore. Once you have ownership, this is something I decided, there's more chance that people will follow halacha. So as I said before, instead of using power, using empowerment. It's not about changing the halacha, it's about changing the way we present the halacha to our followers. And again, I'm speaking mainly about the younger generation looking forward, thinking forward.
I think that was very much the approach of Rav Lichtenstein and Rav Amital. Rav Amital said he didn't want to just create little Amitals. And when people would come to him, he would say, "I'm not a Hasidic Rebbe." He would say, look up the topic and try to come to a conclusion on your own. He felt that a person needs to have the capacity to make independent decisions, and that was really the approach of Rav Amital and Rav Lichtenstein, each in their own way, to enable, to help the person kind of like figure out what the question is, help them address the pros and cons of what maybe if it was a life decision, but they would try to encourage the person on his or her own to come to a decision. And I'm personally familiar with their approach over the years, to that end.
And I agree, and again, I think we always have different approaches to the halacha and Torah. I think understanding our generation and the future generations, my personal belief is that this is the way we should shift to and try to be more empowering of our tzibur, of our audience, of our followers.
We live in the generation of personal autonomy and individuality, and people want to have, I guess, choices, and they want to be part of the process. They want to have ownership of it. That the people should understand this is your Torah and take ownership of it, and you're part of it. Is there any danger in that, where if you give over too much power, then maybe, then people could maybe decide on their own what the law is, what the proper approach is. I mean, can a person get carried away with that?
There's definitely danger. Nothing is secure, especially in our world. The horses are out of the stable. The question is what we can do now in order to, I would say, to save as much as possible. There are definitely, every approach has negative sides, and it can definitely create at least for some people, making their own decisions which are against halacha. But I have a question, Rabbi Topp. Don't we see today, like children, let's say they're the friends of my children, in the age of 20, 30, they are remaining within the religious system, but many of them making their own decisions. That's a reality. So the question is now, what are we doing with the reality? Are we trying to fight it? I think it's too late. Can we take them and empower them? I think this is our hope. And I agree with you. There are risks, and like in everything, like in every approach.
What you're suggesting has relevance for shuls, for our communities, and also for schools. When we talk about Shabbat, do we only focus on the prohibitions of Shabbat and what you're not allowed to do, or do we try to speak about the positives of Shabbat, of what you're allowed to do, what you're encouraged to do, and how to make Shabbat your own? And perhaps we need to focus less on the rebuking, the scolding, what you're not allowed to do, and trying to bring people along in the process to empower them by sharing with them what they're allowed to do and encouraged to do, and how they can grow through the mitzvot, like Shabbat, like Kashrut, like the other mitzvot.
Exactly. When you start with Zachor, it's much easier to deal with the Shamor. Nice. When you start with the Shamor, you can kill Shabbat.
Nice. Does anyone want to ask any questions? You're welcome to raise your hand or unmute yourself, or if you want, you could send a question to the chat box. Rav Ronen, what else did you want to share in terms of some, like a major point of your book about the halachic process? Maybe another way to put it is, what would you say is another myth that people have about halacha? What's a misconception? What's a major misconception that they have of the Torah or of halacha that you maybe want to clear up in the book or in this conversation? I'm just throwing that out there.
Thank you. Actually, I'm dealing with many misconceptions in my book and proving them, especially with regards to halacha and who is entitled to give psak halacha. I'll give an example. One of the major elements of halacha is what Rav Kook defines as Kabbalat Am, the acceptance of the nation. I want to give you an example. Let's take the Shulchan Aruch. How come the Shulchan Aruch became the most prominent halachic source for Am Yisrael since he composed the Shulchan Aruch? Why was he acceptable more than the Rambam, the Torah? Was a bigger Talmid Chacham? How can we measure? The answer is very simple. The Shulchan Aruch was the first halachic composition that was accepted by the entire nation, which did not happen before since the sealing of the Gemara. The sealing of the Gemara was something which was accepted by everyone, but since we have dispersed in all different countries, it was impossible to have one authority that everyone will accept. The Shulchan Aruch is the first halachic composition that was accepted widely. And why? Number one, that was his vision. He speaks about his vision in Magid Mesharim, like to have something that everyone will accept. But what played in his favor is number one, the Ramah. The Ramah that added all his glosses and his comments on the Shulchan Aruch itself made the Shulchan Aruch accessible both for Sephardim and Ashkenazim. And furthermore, the printing press was invented about 50 years before he was born, if I'm not mistaken. So the invention of the printing press helped him to spread Shulchan Aruch all over the Jewish world. The reason why it was accepted is Kabbalat HaUmah. We, the people, the nation, have power. Sometimes we think that the halacha is just in the end of the rabbis, the Batei Din. The people have much more power on halacha than the rabbis. It doesn't mean that the people can be passing halacha, but there has to be a cooperation between the community and the rabbi. Like if there's halacha that if a Beit Din can be the greatest Beit Din with the greatest Talmidei Chachamim is enacting something that is not accepted by the tzibur, it is automatically canceled because we need Kabbalat HaTzibur. Rav Kook says Kabbalat HaTzibur is the main element in halacha. There are many examples, obviously, and I think, like, especially in our times, when we face such tremendous challenges, we cannot just expect the rabbis to solve everything. There has to be a cooperation between the communities, between the leaders and the rabbis to work together, because that's the essence of halacha. The rabbis are the ones who are giving the halacha, but the halacha cannot be given from the ivory tower. It has to be something that tzibur can accept. And I think one of the changes, especially today, that the tzibur, the audience, our congregants are much more knowledgeable. It will be much easier to work together. So, that's one of the misconceptions about halacha, that halacha is just in the hands of the rabbis, and people tend to complain and take ownership. It belongs to each and every one of us. The rabbis are the leaders, but there's a responsibility in the community. They can be the greatest rabbi with the greatest knowledge. If he does not have one follower, he's meaningless. When a Rav has thousands of congregants, it's not just the Rav, it's the congregants. This is a powerhouse of halacha, of rabbinical leadership. And this is something we need to realize. That's one of the misconceptions that I can give an example that are detailed in my book.
I think we see this when the Jewish people sin with the golden calf. Hashem says, Lech Reid, right, to go down to the people. And Rashi there says that because the Jewish people sinned, so Moshe, that affects you. You're going to be demoted from your position of leadership. Rashi says because that it's not that the sanctity of the Jews depends upon you, Moshe. It's the other way around. That the sanctity of Moshe, I guess the quintessential rabbi, the sanctity of the prophet was dependent upon the people. And really the center of the sanctity is in the people. Another related thing is, I guess it's important for the Rav to understand, for all of us to understand the value of the people. In other words, that every single Jew is part of Am Yisrael. And I think that happens to be one hallmark of our community, of our Modern Orthodox community, is that we're fully committed to Torah, but while at the same time, we're fully committed to the notion that every single member of Klal Yisrael has significance and should be loved and respected accordingly. And there are many who hold one and not the other, right? They're fully committed to Torah, and therefore they kind of exclude segments of the population, of the Jewish population. There are others who feel, no, I have to love all Jews, and then it waters down my commitment. But we have to believe in both. We're fully committed to Torah while recognizing the centrality of all of Am Yisrael. And they go together. There's one interesting, so I think that's very interesting, very empowering idea of Ronen in terms of the place of the people, and that every single person can study Torah, can access a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that it's and that really the Rav has to really be concerned about what the tzibur can handle, can accept, where they're at, Basher Hem Sham, when he applies, and when he gives a ruling. A couple interesting things that came through the chat box to me was the COVID pandemic. That Rav Ronen, can you speak to how the COVID pandemic has it posed additional challenges to halacha? What would be your assessment about the rabbinic response to COVID?
Yeah. So we are still in it. It's hard to speak about all the consequences, but one thing that I can say, it definitely expedited the process of kind of disconnection between the Torah and authority. And we've seen this so many times with it can be about unauthorized minyan in different places, about people making their own decisions. If you remember the controversy of the Zoom Seder, there have been so many challenges that made people make their own decisions without leaning into authority. And I think if you spoke about one of the major challenges of postmodern times, of the authority that is eroding and dissipating, I think it's only expedited the process. And looking forward to the future, we will need to see after the pandemic, which please God will be soon after all the vaccination, all the vaccines, we will be, and we will need to kind of rebuild our communities, going back from the Zoom into the shul, how we adapt to the new reality that people got used to a different setting. And it's definitely part of the challenges of the postmodern world, which the pandemic only added and expedited the process. That's my personal take.
By the way, how would you suggest, somebody wrote me a private message here, how would you suggest reading the book? Is it one chapter at a time? Can they choose one chapter and not other ones? Somebody asked me, do you have any recommendations about reading the book? My guess is you would say read it from cover to cover.
Yeah, actually, the book is a build-up. It has, I would say, 3 parts. The first part is about the definition of halacha. What is halacha? Who is entitled to give halachic ruling? Why do we have so many disputes? What is peace in all these disputes? Hillel and Shammai and everything. So that's the first part. The second part deals more with the historical evolvement of halacha. I'm speaking about modern times and about the ancient times, and giving many dilemmas and elements about the halachic process. So I would say the second part is kind of a tour into the halachic lab to better understand the halachic process, the changes, the evolvement. The last part is a part of our times, of contemporary challenges about halacha and ethics and women challenges and much more in our times, trying to, first of all, analyze the challenges based on what we've learned before, and trying to offer a vision for the future, which ends up in the afterwards, in which I'm trying to kind of summarize the book and suggest 10 principles, which I personally believe can help us, the rabbis and the Jewish world, to move forward to the future, future generation, and make sure that the halacha keeps serving its role. So that's basically the book. Obviously, cover to cover, it's much more structured, but you can read each one of the parts individually.
Does anyone have any other questions that they wanted to ask? You have one chapter of Ronen about the Aguna crisis. This is something that something that's on my mind very much, and I'm passionate about. We passed this. Well, every marriage that I do, I make sure to use the halachic prenuptial agreement, which I think is a very, very effective tool to prevent aguna situations. Secondly, I proposed, and it was passed unanimously by the executive board at Beth Jacob several years ago. It's now in the bylaws that, and there's a lot of specifics, but if there's a recalcitrant spouse who's not giving a get after a year, so then he's expelled from membership, expelled from the board, because there's no excuse. The get has to be given in a timely fashion. So this issue is of personal significance to me as a rabbi. I'm currently, sadly, working on a couple of cases actively. What are some? You have a chapter here. You want to share maybe briefly as we wind down? What's a way that you feel the community could deal with it differently to solve the aguna crisis?
First, yasher koach for your passion, and I think each and every one of us must be passionate about this burning issue of aguna. Just briefly, because we are about to end, and there's something else which I wish to add. What I try to do in the chapter of aguna is just to present one angle. There are many different solutions or helpers like the prenup. But I'm speaking about one of the major disputes we had in the past, which is between the Rambam and many other poskim, which I would say even most of the poskim, and between the Ashkenazi poskim, Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh, which actually set the halacha that we use till this very day. The Rambam says something very simple, that if the woman is coming to the Beit Din and says, my Salah is repulsive to me, I can't live with him anymore, this is enough to force get on the husband. We know that the forced get.
Can you say that again, Rav Ronen? You cut out a little bit.
Sorry. The Rambam is posking, and many other poskim are posking like the Rambam, that if a woman comes to the Beit Din and says to the Beit Din, my husband is ma'is alai, meaning is repulsive to me, I cannot live with him one more single second. The Beit Din must force the get on the husband in every possible mean, including beating him or whatever. We know that halachically a forced get is possible. It has to come from the willingness of the husband, but this is the psak of the Rambam, and he says that forcing the get reveals the inner intention of the husband. That was the halacha. In Europe, in the times of Rabbeinu Tam and later on, because of different social issues and challenges they had, they realized that at least for them, this halacha is damaging because every woman who is falling in love with someone else comes to the Beit Din and says, my husband is repulsive and gets a get. And therefore they decided to not to follow the Rambam, but the way which is accepted by this till this very day, that a get is invalid unless it was given without any enforcement, any source of enforcement. The prenup is an example of a way which is not a direct enforcement, that's why it's permissible. Now, I want to quote quickly two of the greatest poskim of our generation. Both of them were part of the great Beit Din of the chief rabbinate in Israel. One of them is Rabbi Eliezer Wallenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer. They both speak, and the other one is Rabbi Kapach. They both speak about the mere fact that, number one, most rabbinical authorities disagree with Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh. And in our times, the fact that we are not using the Rambam causes exactly the opposite. And why? Because most women in our times, especially less committed women, are not if they are going for many, many years, they're not waiting, they're moving on. And it creates tremendous issues of eshet and mamzering. And we need to realize our generation and realize that the Rambam, he is the most fitting authority for our generation. They both said that we wish that the Beit Din would have power to change that policy, but we don't see it yet in any Beit Din, at least that I know. So just quick quotations. Tzitz Eliezer, often do we hear about the terrible pitfalls women fall into and make others fall with the prohibition of eshet ish, and we stand helpless, unable to reinforce the observance of Judaism. When we have the chance, and now Rabbi Kapach, how much righteousness and honesty, wisdom and insight is there in the ruling of our rabbi, the Rambam? A woman is a soul, a human soul. It comes also from the moral point. And how could a person think to force her to engage in an intercourse with someone hated by her? Is repulsive to me, Maisalai. If the other rabbis of the generations would have seen our generation, they would agree with the ruling of the Rambam wholeheartedly. For reality is proven, he's correct that anyone who demands a divorce in our day and claims my salah is repulsive to me has not merely laid their eyes on another, she's already in his bosom. Says Rabbi Kapach, our times have changed and we must return to the stock of the Rambam. So this is an example of, without changing halacha, just realizing, just as because of social demands, the halacha shifted from the Rambam to the system of Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh. In our times, we need to fix the system back to the halacha of the Rambam. It's there, it's not changing the halacha, but it can solve so many problems if the Batei Din will be able to force husbands to give get and to enforce it in many different ways, which unfortunately today is non-existing. Since we're out of time, with your permission, Rabbi Topp, I wish to end up with two things. One of them is, I think, a very significant element, which we did not have the chance to discuss. And the second one is kind of the ending of my book. I believe the 2 minutes. Is that okay?
I was giving you a thumbs up. 2 minutes is perfect. I'm giving you a thumbs up.
Okay, perfect.
2 minutes.
So I believe that every change has to be gradual. Halacha is very insensitive to revolution. Halacha adopts evolution. My best example is women studying Torah. That's the biggest revolution in halacha. We spoke before about where the halacha changed based on the traditional halacha from the Mishnah, from the system of Rabbi Eliezer, the Shulchan Aruch, and later on. A woman that is studying Torah is as if she's dealing with prostitution, like licentiousness. That's the halacha of tiflut. Sorry, that's the meaning of tiflut, prostitution. It relates to we don't have time. The origin of the story, the discussion in the Gemara, but anyways, it was totally prohibited. Sar Schneer came to the Chavetz Chaim and to the Ger Rebbe with this idea, with this vision of realizing that our daughters are studying everything except for Torah, and we are losing them. And she started the chain of schools of Bet Jacob, speaking about Bet Jacob, which spread in a very, very fast way and change the halacha totally. See, Chafetz Chaim says that there's a permission, and we know that in our times, many rabbis say it's not just a permission; it's uh, it's a it's an obligation. We've seen the Siyum Shas last year with 3,000 women in Israel and in Neoma. This is the way halacha is evolving, without creating controversies, without trying to push the envelope, just a gradual process. I think this is the best example of how halacha changed from one side to the other gradually. And I wish to finish with what I write at the end of the book. By the way, I'm quoting a lot in the last chapter. Rabbi Shaul Israeli was one of the greatest rabbis when the state of Israel was established. And he also realized we are facing unprecedented times, because halacha was all written in the Galus, was never written in Eretz Israel. Obviously, it was attacked by many other rabbis that did not accept, but he created the kind of Council of the Rabbis of the Pole Mizrahi, and he says the following: problems does not cease to exist. A problem does not cease to exist merely because it has been ignored. The danger of destruction that threatens us now needs to overcome our concerns. We cannot, the problem is existing, we cannot ignore it. We must think about the future instead of being reactive, having a vision or a supervision for the future. And this is quoting my last paragraph of the book. Rabbinical leadership must act seriously, responsibly, and with great caution. And this is what Rabbi Topp, you mentioned before, that's the narrow bridge. We cannot make changes and run forward. We need to be very cautious because the halachic system is very sensitive. On the other hand, closing our eyes to the things we prefer not to see and hardening our hearts in the face of the enormous challenges we face can lead to a serious damage to the Jewish world. It will require vision, courage, and great responsibility to cross the narrow halachic bridge of halacha. And I'm quoting Reb Nachman, which you mentioned before, Rabbi Topp. A person must cross a very, very narrow bridge. The primary rule is do not be frightened at all. This is my message, and thank you so much for hosting me. Thank you, Rabbi Topp, and thank you everyone for participating in the discussion tonight.
Thank you so much, Ronen. Thank you so much for challenging us with your insights, both challenging us as rabbis and as community members. This was really a fascinating conversation that gives us a lot to think about. And we thank you so much for joining us and give you, a yasher koach, and we wish you also gratitude for all your dedication to Am Yisrael, to halacha, and to the perpetuation of the Masorah. And so thank you, Rav Ronen, for all you're doing, and keep up the great work. And I guess we have to continue. It gives us a lot to think about, and also to be proud of that we're involved in the process of being guardians of the Masorah, and making sure that it's strong for future generations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rav Ronen.
Thank you all, and I hope to see you soon in person in LA, Bezat Hashem.
Looking forward to seeing you in person in LA, maybe even better in Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah, definitely.
Rav Ronen, will be in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nia Bekesha.
Shabbat shalom.